For better and for worse, the world has vastly changed over the past century. With the best-selling publication of Nina and George O'Neill's book, Open Marriage, a new lifestyle for couples in 1972, the phrase, open marriage, entered general usage. They didn't come up with the idea, but they did define open marriage guidelines and provide suggestions on how to have a happy open marriage. Open marriages place a strong emphasis on communication and honesty, just like some of the swinging rules do. Open marriages, in contrast to the swinging lifestyle, permit polyamory within the boundaries of a committed union. In the 1970s, when the sexual revolution was in full swing, couples had to take a risk, keep an open mind, and perhaps visit a specific kind of club together, in order to have a successful open marriage. Relationships also differed greatly from what we do today. Dating instead of courtship wasn't common practice until the turn of the 20th century. A half-century later, free love, or intimacy without would also enter the picture. Marriages being subject to change is not surprising given the century-long evolution of love relationships. But what is unexpected is how drastically different these unions would develop. Here are some wild facts about the 1970s golden age of open marriages. Open marriages came about because of the sexual revolution which took place in the United States and throughout the world beginning in the 1960s. Open marriage was viewed as a way to change and have options within a conventional framework. As an alternative to traditional marriage, the O'Neills promoted open marriage by putting an emphasis on choice and flexibility. Although the O'Neills stressed that an open marriage might or might not include sexual openness, the phrase open marriage, which they coined, became synonymous with non-monogamy, putting the O'Neills in the unfortunate situation of being known primarily for the sole proposition that was rejected rather than the many that were embraced. A husband and wife could continue to enjoy one another's company while taking advantage of new opportunities. Moreover, marriage was far too important as a political and economic institution. It was the way the upper class signed peace treaties and made war. Making a marriage work was the main goal, despite using some unconventional methods. They found that many people had trouble with the concept of traditional marriage. They were informed by one woman, "I don't want to say yes, yeah, we'll be in love forever." You may compare that to saying, "Yes, I know the ocean and the next wave will look like this one, but I can say it is worth the risk if I believe I can do something about it. Man is a thinking animal, therefore I am." This is different from saying, "I'm doing this because I have to do it," which is what it is. For the O'Neills, open marriage relieved some of the burden on the individuals in the marriage itself as an alternative to the unrealistic and idealized version of marriage outlined here. By the early 1900s, another mentality also worked its way into the equation. They added to this the idea that marriage should be based on sexual attraction and fulfillment. Open marriage was considered a preferable alternative to infidelity. There is nothing new under the sun. As long as there has been intimacy, then there has been infidelity. Open marriage connected to swinging culture since it figuratively let outside partners into the union. Some couples found that being upfront about extramarital affairs was considerably more agreeable than lying. Others were told that if they abided by the guidelines, they could avoid committing acts of infidelity and avoid falling in love with their outside partners. STIs were fairly common, but the risks seemed unimportant. In the Golden Age, sexually transmitted infections spread at exponential crazy rates. Since couples were free to experiment with outsiders, syphilis was a particularly devastating infection, which causes a lot of defects. But with the discovery of penicillin in 1928, a cure became possible. While penicillin wasn't used to treat syphilis on a widespread level until the 1940s, the incidence rate of syphilis fell by 95% and its death rate fell by 75% between 1947 and 1957. Once there was a cure for syphilis, people began engaging in riskier habits. During the 1970s, the illegitimate birth ratio, the share of U.S. births by teens, and the incidence of gonorrhea all dramatically increased. Gonorrhea, which declined once antibiotics were discovered, was believed to have been almost eradicated by 1980. Gonorrhea cases in the U.S. were back to levels on par with those from the 1980s. Surprisingly, middle-class practices in the 1970s included swinging and open marriage. In the 1960s and 1970s, there was a sexual freedom and revolution that encompassed everything from the emergence of feminism to a greater understanding of homosexuality to the need for women to have authority over their own bodies. Couples and individuals participated in swinging and open marriages, experimenting with new intimate liberties, along with those movements. However, there wasn't a lot of duplication of effort. Both swinging and open marriage had a somewhat bureaucratized and decidedly unfestival-like quality, and participants in these activities hardly ever engaged in movements for such things as abortion reform or changing legislation pertaining to homosexuality. Therefore, those in open marriages were open to switching partners, but they weren't necessarily striving to overthrow the patriarchy or advance other sexual and civil liberties on a bigger scale. Open marriages allowed open unions for heterosexual and bisexual experimentation. There were more than just heterosexual partnerships in open marriage. Even more than just intimate relationships were involved. Open marriages frequently featured same-gender relationships for friendship or for recreational purposes. As long as both partners were on board, it was also okay if one of the spouses had questions about bisexual relationships. In the early 1980s, open marriage lost popularity. The collapse of open marriage was influenced by dangers to both marriage and health, with the AIDS crisis of the early 1980s having a particularly negative impact on the latter. Less open marriages and swinging were caused by sexually transmitted diseases, particularly AIDS. It was challenging for partners to trust one another because so many people in open relationships weren't actively adhering to the principles of a good open relationship. For many of the participants in open marriages who were fairly middle class, center-of-the-road people, the possibility of being left as the only caregiver for a spouse dying of AIDS was a frightening one. Even so, swinging and open marriages persisted in some cases. Nina and George O'Neill wrote a book about open marriages. Non-monogamous marriage, a social practice that was becoming more and more popular, was given a name by Nina and George O'Neill in 1972. They provided advice on how to make open marriages work in their book Open Marriage, A New Lifestyle for Couples. The book, which encouraged readers to re-examine their marriages and be open to new experiences, spent 40 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and sold 1.5 million copies. There were 8 guidelines for open marriage. The O'Neills outlined 8 principles for a happy open marriage. Both people needed to concentrate on creating reasonable expectations and living in the present. It was essential to maintain the couple's and the marriage's privacy. Role flexibility was essential for mutual understanding, and open companionship and honest communication were tools for improving both the individual and the couple as a whole. The last 3 rules, equality, identity, and trust, all interacted with one another in a positive way. The rules were designed to foster personal growth for each member while also strengthening the marriage's interpersonal relationships. Every part of the marriage revolved around being open. There has been a resurgence of open marriages. Open marriage works for some pairs of people. As millennials challenge conventional marriage standards, a return to honesty and trust inside marriage has become increasingly prevalent, as has a hearty serving of polyamory. According to some, these relationships produce a stronger level of closeness and commitment than a one-on-one relationship since they have their own set of rules. Recently, there has also been a clearer definition of open relationships and polyamory. According to one man, being polyamorous adds the possibility of love and commitment to more than one person at a time, whereas being in an open relationship is more casual and is mostly about openly and honestly having some fun, while still being committed to one person.
Sure is, baby.